The smartest person in the room is usually the one everyone almost sends home. At exactly 9:17 on a gray Tuesday morning, 12 candidates sat around the polished glass conference table on the 40th floor of Whitmore Industrial Systems overlooking downtown Seattle. Every resume except one carried prestigious universities, executive titles, international consulting firms, and impressive awards. Claire Whitmore, the 37-year-old billionaire chief executive officer, reviewed each file with practiced efficiency, stopping for nearly a minute on some and making short handwritten notes beside others. Then she reached a thin resume containing only a single page. Ryan Mitchell, maintenance supervisor, Jefferson High School, previous engineering experience ending 6 years earlier. No graduate degree, no recent corporate leadership. Claire looked at it for barely 6 seconds before quietly placing it face down beside her notebook without another glance. Across the table, Ryan noticed the movement but said nothing. His navy suit had been carefully pressed even though it was several years old, and the leather folder resting on his lap showed gentle signs of long use. Inside it, tucked beside his resume, was a small woven friendship bracelet decorated with blue and green threads. His 9-year-old daughter Lucy had slipped it into his folder before school that morning and whispered, "For good luck, Dad." Ryan gently touched the bracelet with one finger before folding his hands together again. 11 candidates delivered polished presentations filled with charts, management theories, and confident promises. Claire listened politely, although none of their answers eased the growing pressure resting on her shoulders. Whitmore Industrial Systems had only 30 days to stabilize its largest manufacturing plant before a $180 million contract disappeared forever. The board expected a miracle, and today's interview would decide who led that rescue. Douglas Crane, the company's chief operating officer, sat quietly near the end of the table watching every candidate with calculated confidence. He already believed he knew who would receive the position. Ryan remained almost invisible until Claire finally looked toward him. "Mr. Mitchell," she said with professional courtesy, "you are our final candidate." Several executives exchanged discreet glances. One interviewer quietly checked the time. Another closed his notebook halfway, assuming the meeting had effectively ended. Claire tapped a remote, and a complex digital model of the Tacoma manufacturing plant filled the enormous presentation screen. "Imagine this," she began. "You arrive at our largest facility. Production has collapsed. You have exactly 1 hour before operations must be shut down. What is your first decision?" The room became perfectly still. Every previous candidate had answered with nearly identical strategies. Emergency task forces, budget reallocations, consultant support, vendor escalation. Ryan studied the colorful production charts without speaking for several long seconds. Instead of looking nervous, he looked curious. Finally, he raised his eyes toward Claire. "Before I answer," he said calmly, "I have one question." Claire nodded. "Go ahead." Ryan pointed toward a narrow column of operating data displayed near the corner of the screen. "Why did the night shift stop reporting pressure loss?" Exactly 11 minutes before the first alarm. Silence spread across the conference room so completely that even the quiet hum of the ceiling ventilation suddenly sounded loud. Claire's expression changed instantly. She slowly turned toward the presentation screen, then back toward Ryan. Nobody outside the executive crisis team knew that 11 minutes of operating data had disappeared before the incident. Those missing records had never been included in any interview materials. Douglas shifted uncomfortably in his chair for the first time all morning. Claire leaned forward without taking her eyes off Ryan. "Mr. Mitchell," she asked carefully, "how could you possibly know that 11 minutes were missing?" Sometimes the strongest answer begins years before anyone asks the question. Ryan Mitchell did not respond immediately to Claire Whitmore's question. Instead, he looked once more at the production chart glowing across the conference room screen before quietly folding his hands together. "Because the pressure trend does not disappear," he answered calmly. "Only the timestamps do. The graph continues too smoothly after the interruption. Machines can fail. Sensors can fail. Reports can fail. Time does not fail by exactly 11 minutes unless someone teaches the system to forget." Nobody spoke. Claire slowly lowered the remote control she was still holding. Douglas Crane forced a polite smile. "That is an interesting theory," he said, "but this exercise is about leadership decisions, not technical speculation." Ryan nodded respectfully. "Leadership begins with asking whether the problem you see is the real problem." Before anyone could continue, Claire's phone vibrated on the conference table. She glanced at the caller identification and answered immediately. It was the manager of the Tacoma facility. Every executive watched her expression change as she listened. "Repeat that," she said quietly. "You found what?" A long pause followed. Claire stood without realizing it. "Thank you. Do not touch anything until I arrive." She ended the call and looked directly at Ryan. "Our engineers have just discovered a reporting relay that stopped transmitting data for exactly 11 minutes before the shutdown sequence." The room fell completely silent again. Douglas shifted in his chair, avoiding Ryan's eyes. Claire slowly sat back down. "Please continue, Mr. Mitchell." Ryan remained composed. "Restarting the plant immediately could erase evidence. Before repairing anything, I would verify whether the missing timestamps came from equipment failure or human intervention. If the data was altered intentionally, repairing the machine solves nothing because the real failure is inside the reporting process." Claire studied him with genuine curiosity now rather than polite obligation. "Have you worked on a system like ours?" Ryan smiled faintly. "Not for a long time." Douglas quickly interrupted. "Your resume says you have spent the last 6 years maintaining facilities at Jefferson High School." Ryan nodded. "That is correct." Douglas leaned back confidently. "Then perhaps your experience is no longer relevant to industrial manufacturing." Ryan accepted the comment without offense. "Children notice patterns before adults explain them away. Machines do something similar. If you watch carefully enough, both usually tell the truth." Claire looked down at the single-page resume she had placed face down only minutes earlier. For the first time, she turned it over and actually read every line. There was very little written there. No lengthy executive summary. No impressive list of corporate achievements. Only a brief description of work completed years earlier, followed by 6 quiet years that appeared almost empty. Yet the man sitting across from her had recognized a hidden anomaly that 11 accomplished candidates and several senior executives had completely overlooked. The interview officially ended a few minutes later, but nobody hurried toward the elevator. Several executives remained whispering among themselves, while Claire continued reading Ryan's resume as though she expected hidden pages to appear. Ryan thanked everyone for their time, placed the blue and green friendship bracelet back inside his folder, and walked calmly toward the conference room door. As he reached the hallway, his phone buzzed with a message from Lucy. A picture appeared on the screen showing the lunchbox he had packed before sunrise with the words, "Best lunch ever." "Good luck, Dad." Ryan smiled warmly before slipping the phone into his pocket and leaving the building without knowing that behind the glass conference room walls, Claire Whitmore had just asked the Human Resources Director a question that would quietly change the course of both their lives. Who exactly is Ryan Mitchell? And why does his resume tell me almost nothing about him? Long before Claire Whitmore arrived at her office the following morning, Ryan Mitchell had already been awake for nearly 3 hours. At 5:20 every weekday, the small kitchen inside his modest Seattle home came alive with quiet routines that never appeared on any resume. Fresh coffee brewed, while oatmeal simmered on the stove. 2 lunch boxes sat side by side on the counter, one decorated with tiny blue stars for Lucy and the other plain stainless steel for Ryan. He carefully sliced apples, packed turkey sandwiches, added carrot sticks, and slipped a handwritten note into Lucy's lunch that simply read, "You make every day worth it." Upstairs, Lucy called for help with her hair. Ryan smiled, washed his hands, and walked upstairs carrying a hairbrush and 2 blue ribbons. "Still practicing?" Lucy teased as he gently divided her hair into even sections. Ryan laughed. "I'm improving 1 braid at a time." Lucy looked into the mirror and grinned. "Mom would say you finally figured it out." Ryan paused for the briefest moment before smiling again. She probably would. 10 minutes later, father and daughter walked toward Jefferson High School beneath a cool Seattle morning sky. Lucy chatted excitedly about her upcoming science fair, while Ryan listened with complete attention, never checking his phone even when it vibrated inside his jacket pocket. After making sure Lucy safely entered the school building, he crossed the parking lot toward the maintenance workshop where another busy day was already waiting. Before first period even began, Ryan repaired a leaking pipe beneath the cafeteria sink, replaced broken lights inside the library, adjusted a malfunctioning heating vent in the music room, and helped the robotics teacher restore power to a damaged workbench. Teachers greeted him by name because they knew every difficult problem somehow became manageable once Ryan quietly arrived carrying his toolbox. Shortly before lunch, a freshman nervously approached him holding a broken wheelchair footrest. Ryan knelt beside the student without hesitation, tightened the damaged bracket, tested every connection twice, and smiled. "Try now." The student rolled forward easily and returned the smile with visible relief. Ryan simply nodded and continued walking toward his next repair request as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Across the city, Claire sat alone inside her executive office reading Ryan's single-page resume for the 5th time. It still contained frustratingly little information. One engineering position ending 6 years earlier. One current maintenance job. Almost nothing else. She pressed the intercom. "Mary Ann, could you come in for a moment?" The human resources director entered carrying several personnel files. Claire held up Ryan's resume. "This cannot be everything." Marian hesitated before answering. "It is everything he submitted." Claire frowned slightly. "There is a 6-year gap where someone with his ability simply disappears." Marian looked toward the window before speaking quietly. "Or perhaps someone spent 6 years doing something more important than building a career." Claire remained silent. Mary Ann continued carefully. "His references all describe him the same way. Reliable, humble, brilliant when necessary. None of them mention awards. None of them mention promotions. They all mention character." Claire slowly placed the resume back on her desk. "Find out what happened before Jefferson High School." Marian nodded and left the office. Meanwhile, Ryan finished his final afternoon repair just as students poured into the hallways. Lucy ran toward him, carrying a small cardboard model of a factory she had built for science class. She proudly pointed to tiny paper conveyor belts stretching across the roof. Ryan studied every detail with genuine admiration before smiling warmly. "You remembered that every system depends on timing." Lucy nodded. "Just like you always tell me. If one part forgets when to help the next part, everything slows down." Ryan laughed softly as they walked toward the parking lot together, completely unaware that the simple lesson he had taught his daughter years ago was about to unlock a secret buried deep inside Whitmore Industrial Systems. The next afternoon, Mary Ann Cole quietly entered Claire Whitmore's office carrying a thick archival folder that looked nothing like the single-page resume resting on the executive desk. Claire looked up immediately. "You found something." Mary Ann nodded. "Not through his application. Through old company records." She carefully opened the folder and slid several faded project reports across the desk. Claire's eyes stopped on one name repeated throughout the documents. Harbor Line Recovery Project. Technical Systems Lead. Ryan Mitchell. Claire leaned closer. "He never mentioned this." Marian answered softly. Neither did anyone else. The reports described a manufacturing recovery program completed nearly a decade earlier that had saved millions of dollars by identifying hidden reporting errors instead of replacing expensive equipment. Claire continued reading in silence. Every recommendation carried Ryan's signature, yet the final executive summary credited senior management for the project's success. One signature at the bottom immediately caught her attention. Douglas Crane. Claire slowly looked toward the conference room beyond her office window, where Douglas was leading another executive meeting with his usual confidence. Did he know Ryan before yesterday? Marian hesitated before answering. Their names appeared together several times in these files. Claire remained thoughtful. Why would someone capable of leading a project like this spend 6 years maintaining a high school? Mary Ann removed one final document from the folder. It was an old newspaper article featuring a group of engineers celebrating the Harbor Line recovery. Ryan stood near the edge of the photograph, almost hidden behind taller executives. His smile looked genuine, but he was not standing in the center beside the award. Claire noticed something else. The article had been published only 3 weeks before Ryan disappeared from the corporate world entirely. Find out what happened after this photograph, Claire said quietly. Across town, Ryan finished replacing damaged lockers inside Jefferson High School before joining Lucy outside the science classroom. She excitedly carried her cardboard factory model beneath one arm. Mrs. Anderson loved it, she announced proudly. She said the conveyor belts actually make sense. Ryan smiled. That is because you remembered every station depends on the one before it. Lucy nodded enthusiastically. Nothing works if someone changes the timing. Ryan looked at the model for a moment, gently adjusting one tiny paper gear that had shifted out of place during the school day. Exactly. At nearly the same hour, Douglas stepped into Claire's office without knocking. I understand Human Resources is spending a surprising amount of time researching yesterday's last candidate. Claire calmly closed the project folder before answering. I like understanding people before making decisions. Douglas smiled politely. With respect, Ryan Mitchell repaired school boilers for 6 years. We are trying to save a multinational manufacturer. Claire studied his expression, then explained why he recognized a hidden reporting anomaly that every executive in this company missed. Douglas answered quickly. A lucky observation. Claire remained unconvinced. Perhaps. After Douglas left, she reopened the Harbor Line, file one final time. Tucked inside the back cover was a handwritten engineering note in Ryan's unmistakably careful handwriting. It contained only one sentence. When every report points in the same direction, always verify who drew the map. Claire read the line twice before slowly looking toward the Tacoma plant displayed on the large monitor across her office wall. For the first time, she stopped asking whether Ryan had guessed correctly during the interview. She began asking a far more dangerous question. What if someone inside her own company had been counting on nobody asking the question Ryan asked first? The following morning, Claire Whitmore stood alone inside the executive operations center overlooking a massive digital wall displaying live data from the Tacoma manufacturing plant. Every production line, pressure reading, temperature level, and shipping schedule flowed across the screens in perfect order, yet she no longer trusted what appeared to be perfect. Ryan Mitchell's quiet question from the interview continued echoing in her mind. Why did the night shift stop reporting pressure loss exactly 11 minutes before the first alarm? She pressed a button on the conference table. Mary Ann, please ask Mr. Mitchell if he would be willing to visit the Tacoma facility today as an independent consultant. He is not accepting a position. He is simply reviewing a problem. Mary Ann nodded immediately. Less than an hour later, Ryan arrived wearing the same simple navy jacket he wore every day at Jefferson High School. He had already finished replacing damaged classroom lights before requesting personal leave for the afternoon. Claire met him outside the administration building instead of waiting in her office. Thank you for coming, she said sincerely. Ryan smiled politely. You said you wanted another opinion. Claire nodded. I want an honest one. Inside the control room, engineers gathered around large monitoring stations while Douglas Crane confidently explained the company's investigation. The relay malfunction has already been replaced, Douglas announced. Production should return to normal within hours. Ryan quietly listened without interrupting. Instead of walking toward the control panels, he surprised everyone by asking a supervisor a completely different question. May I meet the night shift technicians? Douglas frowned. They have already submitted written reports. Ryan remained calm. Reports explain what people remember. Conversations explain what people noticed. Claire watched silently as 4 night shift technicians entered the room. Ryan thanked each of them individually before asking only one question. What was the first thing that felt unusual before the alarm sounded? The technicians looked at one another. Finally, the oldest among them spoke. Nothing sounded different. The machines were running normally. What confused us was the dashboard. It suddenly refreshed twice, then skipped ahead. Ryan nodded. Exactly 11 minutes? The technician's eyes widened. Yes. Ryan turned toward Claire. That is not equipment behavior. That is information behavior. He walked toward a secondary equipment cabinet mounted against the wall instead of approaching the main production system. After studying several network indicators for less than a minute, he pointed toward a small communication module installed behind the primary relay. This device delays outgoing operational data before forwarding it to headquarters. It does not control the machines. It controls what executives believe the machines are doing. The room fell silent. One engineer quickly connected diagnostic software to the module. Seconds later, hidden transmission logs appeared on the monitor. Every missing 11-minute interval had been manually scheduled weeks in advance. Claire slowly looked toward Douglas. His confident expression disappeared for the first time. Ryan folded his arms quietly. Someone wanted headquarters to believe production failures were becoming more frequent than they actually were. If leadership believes the plant is collapsing, they stop asking why the reports changed and start replacing people instead. Claire stared at the newly uncovered records scrolling across the screen. The crisis threatening her company had never truly been inside the machinery. It had been buried inside the information reaching her office. One senior engineer finally broke the silence. Nobody here thought to inspect the communication module. Ryan smiled gently. Most people repair what looks broken. Very few investigate who benefits from something appearing broken. Claire looked at Ryan with unmistakable respect now, realizing the man whose resume she had almost ignored had uncovered more truth in 30 minutes than her executive team had found in an entire month, while somewhere across town Lucy proudly showed her classmates another carefully built model. Never imagining the simple lessons her father had taught her every evening were quietly rescuing one of the largest companies in the Pacific Northwest. Claire Whitmore returned to headquarters carrying more than diagnostic reports. She carried doubt, and for the first time since becoming chief executive officer, that doubt was aimed at someone inside her own executive team instead of the people beneath them. The hidden communication module had not installed itself. The scheduled reporting delays had not appeared by accident. Someone with authority had approved the changes, and someone had expected nobody to question them. Claire immediately instructed the Information Security Department to preserve every system log connected to the Tacoma facility. She gave only one condition. Do not inform anyone outside this room until I review everything personally. As the investigation quietly expanded, Ryan prepared to leave the plant. He thanked each technician who had answered his questions, shook hands with the maintenance crew, and collected the small notebook he always carried in his jacket pocket. Claire caught up with him near the employee parking lot. You could stay, she said. There are people inside this company who would benefit from hearing how you think. Ryan smiled politely. The people who needed to hear me were the technicians. They already knew something was wrong. They simply needed someone to ask the right question. Claire hesitated before speaking again. You solved in one afternoon what my executive team could not solve in weeks. Ryan quietly shook his head. No, they had the information. I only listened to the people standing beside the machines. His answer stayed with Claire long after he drove away. Back inside headquarters, Marion entered Claire's office, carrying another archive box recovered from the company's long-term storage room. I believe you should see these before tomorrow's board meeting, she said. Inside were engineering evaluations from the Harbor Line Recovery Project completed years earlier. Claire carefully compared the handwritten technical recommendations with the recently recovered Tacoma notes. The language was unmistakably similar. Every report focused first on people closest to the equipment instead of executive assumptions. Every conclusion began with observations before recommendations. Every solution emphasized understanding the source of inaccurate information rather than replacing expensive machinery. Then Claire reached the final executive summary. The primary recommendation credited to Douglas Crane matched almost word for word an earlier technical proposal signed by Ryan Mitchell weeks before. Claire looked up slowly. This recommendation was originally his. Marion nodded. The supporting drafts indicate that Ryan prepared the recovery strategy. The final presentation to the board was delivered by Douglas after Ryan requested emergency leave. Claire continued reading until she found the personnel records attached near the back of the file. Ryan had not resigned because another company recruited him. He had requested immediate family leave after his wife received a life-threatening medical diagnosis. 3 months later, she passed away. Ryan never returned to corporate engineering. Instead, he accepted a maintenance position close to Lucy's elementary school so he could raise his daughter himself. Claire quietly closed the file and stared through the office windows overlooking Seattle. 6 years that appeared empty on a resume had actually been filled with hospital visits, school mornings, bedtime stories, repaired bicycles, science projects, homework, and every ordinary moment a child remembers forever. Douglas's voice interrupted her thoughts as he entered carrying financial projections for the upcoming board meeting. The replacement relay should stabilize production, he said confidently. Investors will appreciate decisive leadership. Claire accepted the folder without revealing what she had learned. Perhaps, she answered calmly. Tomorrow I would also like you to explain every approval connected to the communication module installation. For the first time since joining the company, Douglas hesitated before answering. Of course. After he left, Claire looked once more at Ryan's one-page resume resting beside the thick archive box. The thinner document had hidden the larger story, and she realized something that unsettled her deeply. She had almost rejected the most qualified candidate in the building because she had judged a man's life by the few years he chose to write down instead of the many years he chose to live. The following morning, the executive boardroom overlooking Seattle filled earlier than usual. Directors, legal advisors, senior engineers, and department heads quietly took their seats after receiving Claire Whitmore's unexpected request for a full operational review. Nobody knew why the agenda had changed overnight. At exactly 9 o'clock, Claire entered carrying two folders. One contained the recent Tacoma investigation. The other contained the Harbor Line archive Marianne had recovered from storage. Douglas Crane confidently greeted the board as though nothing unusual had happened. He expected another routine discussion about production recovery. Claire remained standing instead of taking her seat. Before we discuss future strategy, she began calmly, we need to understand why false information reached this board in the first place. The large presentation screen illuminated with communication logs recovered from Tacoma. Engineers explained how scheduled reporting delays had created the illusion of repeated production failures, even while the manufacturing equipment continued operating normally. Several directors exchanged concerned looks. Douglas immediately responded. The relay installation followed standard modernization procedures. Any reporting delays were unintended side effects. Claire nodded without interrupting. Then she opened the second folder. Interesting, she replied, because this company has experienced the exact same pattern before. She displayed engineering records from the Harbor Line recovery project completed years earlier. Side by side, two recommendations appeared on the screen. One carried Ryan Mitchell's original handwritten proposal. The second, submitted weeks later under Douglas Crane's executive summary, repeated nearly every conclusion. Silence slowly spread across the room. Claire continued speaking with measured confidence. Years ago, someone recognized that inaccurate reporting was more dangerous than mechanical failure. Last week, another person recognized exactly the same pattern within minutes. One board member leaned forward. Are you saying the same engineer identified both problems? Claire answered without hesitation. Yes. Douglas attempted to regain control. Ryan Mitchell left corporate engineering 6 years ago. His observations yesterday do not prove misconduct. Before Claire could respond, the Chief Information Security Officer entered carrying a sealed evidence case. Newly recovered authorization records had identified the executive account used to approve the communication module responsible for delaying production reports. The officer quietly handed the report to Claire. She read only the final page before placing it on the conference table. The approval originated from an executive account assigned to Douglas Crane. Nobody spoke. Douglas stared at the documents before answering carefully. Someone could have used my credentials. Claire remained composed. That possibility will be investigated completely. Until then, the board has unanimously agreed to place you on administrative leave pending an independent review. Douglas slowly stood, realizing every eye in the room now watched him with the same uncertainty once directed toward Ryan. He gathered his notebook without another word and quietly walked toward the exit. The conference room door closed behind him with remarkable gentleness. No celebration followed. Claire looked around the room before speaking again. We almost lost an important contract because we trusted reports more than the people closest to the work. We almost rejected the one person capable of recognizing that mistake because we judged his resume before we listened to his thinking. Later that afternoon, Claire drove to Jefferson High School instead of calling Ryan into another executive meeting. She found him repairing a damaged stage curtain inside the auditorium while students rehearsed for a music performance. He finished tightening the final bolt before greeting her with his usual calm smile. Claire looked around the simple auditorium, then back at Ryan. "The board wants to offer you the position," she said quietly. Ryan listened respectfully, but did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the front row, where Lucy sat reading a library book while patiently waiting for him to finish work. After a thoughtful pause, he looked back at Claire and said, "Before I accept any offer, there is one condition that matters more than the salary, the title, or the office." Claire Whitmore waited patiently for Ryan Mitchell to finish securing the last section of the stage curtain before responding. The quiet applause from students rehearsing on the opposite side of the auditorium echoed softly. Through the room, Ryan carefully placed his tools back into their worn toolbox, wiped his hands with a clean cloth, and walked toward Claire with the same calm expression that had never changed, whether he was repairing a school auditorium or identifying a hidden corporate crisis. Claire smiled slightly. "You said you have one condition." Ryan nodded. "Yes." He looked toward Lucy, who was happily reading on the front row without paying attention to the conversation. "I've already missed enough moments that can never be repeated. If I accept your offer, I will never become the kind of father who promises to be home and then lets meetings decide otherwise." Claire listened without interrupting. Ryan continued quietly. "I will give your company my full effort while I am working. But every afternoon, unless there is a true emergency, I leave in time to pick up my daughter from school. I attend her science fairs. I help with homework. I keep my promises. If becoming an executive means breaking those promises, then I am not the right person for the position." Claire remained silent for several seconds before answering. "Your condition is not unreasonable." Ryan smiled politely. "Many companies say that until the first important meeting appears." Claire looked around the auditorium where teachers prepared chairs for the evening performance. "Then perhaps our company needs to become different." The following morning, Claire presented a completely revised employment proposal to the board of directors. The position would remain Director of Systems Integrity, but the role included flexible scheduling, measurable performance goals instead of unnecessary office hours, and a company-wide initiative allowing parents to adjust schedules around important family responsibilities whenever operationally possible. Several directors looked surprised. One finally asked, "Are we changing policy for one employee?" Claire calmly shook her head. "No, we are correcting a policy that should never have ignored responsible families in the first place." The proposal passed with overwhelming support. Later that afternoon, Claire personally drove to Jefferson High School once again. This time she carried no contract and no presentation folder. Instead, she arrived just as the annual student science exhibition opened inside the gymnasium. Colorful displays filled every table while proud parents walked from project to project. Lucy stood beside her factory model explaining production timing to visitors with remarkable confidence. When she noticed Claire entering the gym, she smiled brightly. "Miss Whitmore, you came." Claire smiled warmly. "I promised I would." Lucy eagerly demonstrated how one delayed conveyor belt slowed every station that followed. Claire listened with genuine interest instead of pretending to understand. "Your father taught you this?" Lucy nodded proudly. "He always says every system depends on people trusting each other." Claire glanced across the room where Ryan quietly congratulated another student's project before walking toward them. There was no expensive gift, no publicity, and no photographers. Only a father celebrating his daughter's accomplishment and a woman beginning to understand why 6 years missing from a resume could represent the most valuable experience a leader might ever have. As the exhibition ended, Lucy looked from Ryan to Claire with an innocent smile that carried none of the tension adults often create for themselves. "Would you like to have dinner with us?" she asked. Ryan looked surprised, but remained silent. Claire smiled gently before answering. "I will be honored if your father agrees." Ryan looked at Lucy's hopeful face, then back at Claire, and for the first time since they had met, the conversation between them no longer felt like an interview, a negotiation, or a business decision. It felt like the quiet beginning of trust built not through impressive resumes or executive titles, but through promises that people were willing to keep. 3 months later, Whitmore Industrial Systems looked very different from the company Ryan Mitchell had first walked into carrying a single-page resume. The Tacoma facility had recovered its production schedule. The $180 million contract had been renewed, and the new reporting system required every operational concern to be verified directly with frontline employees before reaching the executive board. More importantly, the company no longer measured leadership by impressive titles alone. Every finalist applying for technical leadership positions now solved real operational challenges before anyone reviewed educational backgrounds or previous job titles. Claire Whitmore insisted on the change herself. Whenever directors questioned the new hiring process, she simply replied, "Competence deserves to speak before assumptions do." Ryan accepted the position of Director of Systems Integrity only after every promise discussed inside the school auditorium became part of his written agreement. His workday ended in time to pick Lucy up from school unless a genuine emergency required otherwise. Meetings began with clear objectives instead of endless presentations. Engineers, technicians, and maintenance teams were encouraged to question executive decisions without fear of punishment whenever evidence supported their concerns. Slowly, the culture changed because people realized that truth traveled upward faster when nobody feared telling it. Ryan never moved into a luxurious office overlooking the city. Instead, he requested a practical workspace beside the engineering department where technicians could walk in without appointments. His toolbox remained beneath one shelf beside technical manuals, reminding everyone that leadership was not about standing farther away from the work. Claire occasionally visited that office without assistance or scheduled meetings. Sometimes they discussed manufacturing systems. Sometimes they discussed school science projects because Lucy always seemed to have another invention waiting at home. Their conversations became easier with each passing week, built on mutual respect rather than admiration alone. One Friday afternoon, Claire quietly arrived at Jefferson High School, carrying nothing except a small notebook. Lucy's science team had earned first place at the regional competition with an improved version of her factory model. As students celebrated, Claire applauded from the audience beside parents, teachers, and neighbors without asking for recognition. After the ceremony, Lucy proudly introduced her classmates to Miss Whitmore, explaining that she was the person who believed grown-ups should ask better questions. Claire laughed softly because she realized the child had summarized months of change more honestly than any corporate report ever could. That evening, the three of them shared dinner inside Ryan's modest kitchen. Fresh pasta simmered on the stove while Lucy enthusiastically described her next science project. Claire helped set the table without hesitation, and Ryan quietly noticed how naturally she fit into the simple routine that had defined his life for years. Before dinner began, Lucy disappeared into her room and returned carrying a simple wooden picture frame. Inside the frame rested Ryan's original one-page resume. Beneath it, she had carefully written in neat handwriting, "The right answer is always bigger than the first impression." Claire looked at the frame page for a long moment before smiling at Ryan. "I almost missed the best leader I have ever met because I stopped reading too soon." Ryan gently shook his head. "No, you found the answer because you decided to keep asking questions." Claire nodded thoughtfully. She finally understood that great leadership was never about having the longest resume, the highest title, or the loudest voice. It was about listening carefully enough to recognize quiet wisdom when everyone else had already looked away. Outside, the Seattle evening settled peacefully over the neighborhood while laughter drifted through the open kitchen window. Inside that small home, a billionaire, a devoted father, and an extraordinary little girl shared an ordinary dinner together, proving that the strongest futures are often built by people willing to value character before credentials and truth before appearances.